Disrespect never starts with an insult. It starts with familiarity going unchecked, a small shift in tone, a pause that stretches longer than it used to, a response that arrives late without explanation. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. That is why most people miss the moment when it begins. By the time disrespect is visible, it has already been rehearsed. People assume disrespect is an act. It is not. It is a pattern. And patterns do not form from aggression. They form from repetition without consequence. The first thing to understand is that disrespect does not require hostility. It only requires continued access. As long as someone can reach you in the same way they always have, their behavior has no reason to change. Even irritation, even conflict, even arguments still count as access. Access is the currency here. Most attempts to end disrespect fail because they never touch access. They address tone, they address feelings, they address fairness. None of those alter the structure. They leave the relationship intact while asking it to behave differently. That is not how behavior changes. People do not adjust because they are corrected. They adjust because conditions shift. This is where instinct interferes. When disrespect appears, the nervous system seeks balance. It wants symmetry restored. It wants acknowledgement. It wants the other person to understand. That urge feels rational. It is also predictable. And predictability is exactly what allows disrespect to continue. When someone disrespects you and you respond immediately, you teach them something important. You teach them that the relationship remains active even under erosion. That discomfort will be managed emotionally rather than structurally. That the cost of disrespect is conversation, not loss. Conversation is cheap. This is why repeated disrespect often coexists with long explanations, emotional talks, and boundary statements that lead nowhere. The words are present. The conditions are unchanged. Disrespect is not a misunderstanding waiting to be clarified. It is a behavior waiting to see if it will be tolerated again. Most people tolerate longer than they admit, not because they enjoy it, because they are attached to continuity. They value the connection, the role, the familiarity. They hope the behavior will self-correct. Hope is not leverage. Machiavelli understood that power is not maintained by correction, but by consequence. Correction invites defense. Consequence alters behavior without debate. The one behavior that ends disrespect permanently is not forceful confrontation. It is not calm explanation. It is not asserting dominance. It is the consistent removal of access without justification. Not silence as drama, not distance as punishment. Removal as reality. This is colder than most people are comfortable with because it does not offer resolution. It does not soothe. It does not explain itself. And that is why it works. When access changes, the system recalibrates automatically. No argument is required. No agreement is necessary. Behavior adapts or the connection dissolves. Disrespect survives on proximity. When proximity is reduced, disrespect loses traction. The difficulty is not understanding this. The difficulty is doing it without leaking emotion. Many people attempt withdrawal and fail because they explain it. They announce it. They justify it. They try to make the other person understand why distance is happening. That explanation restores access. The explanation becomes the new point of engagement. The disrespect simply moves there. True withdrawal does not argue. It does not warn. It does not negotiate. It does not attempt to teach a lesson. It changes availability. This feels extreme because you were taught that relationships are maintained through communication, that silence is immature, that distance is avoidance. Those rules apply in cooperative environments. They do not apply in power dynamics. Power dynamics are governed by cost. As long as someone can disrespect you and retain the same level of access, nothing has changed. They may apologize. They may adjust briefly, but the underlying calculation remains intact. Calculation is what drives behavior, not intention. People rarely disrespect those whose access is fragile. They are careful with those they can lose. Loss does not need to be threatened. It only needs to be real. This is where many people sabotage themselves. They withdraw emotionally, but remain structurally available. They stop engaging deeply but still respond quickly. They create distance in tone but not in access. That mixed signal creates confusion, not correction. Confusion prolongs disrespect. What ends it is consistency. Availability narrows across time. Response slows without explanation. Engagement becomes selective without announcement. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just different conditions. This forces the other person into a position they did not expect. They can no longer test casually. They can no longer push lightly. Each attempt costs more because access is no longer guaranteed. Some will adjust immediately. Their behavior cleans up without a word being spoken. This tells you the disrespect was opportunistic. They noticed a gap and used it. Others will escalate. They will question the distance. They will accuse you of changing. They will frame withdrawal as unfair, cold, or excessive. That reaction is not proof you are wrong. It is proof that access mattered more than they admitted. Escalation is exposure. When someone reacts strongly to reduced access, it reveals dependency. It reveals that the connection was being used, not respected. You do not respond to escalation with explanation. Explanation is a gift. You let the conditions remain. This is where most people break. They feel guilty. They fear being perceived as cruel. They fear losing the relationship entirely. Loss is not the threat here. Loss is the filter. Anything that requires you to tolerate erosion to survive was already costing you more than it gave. This is not about punishing disrespect. Punishment keeps the relationship alive through conflict. Removal ends leverage. Machiavelli preferred outcomes that did not require repeated enforcement. He understood that permanent change comes from altering the environment, not policing behavior. When access is conditional, behavior aligns. This does not mean becoming unavailable to everyone. It means recognizing who has access and under what conditions. Respect is not demanded. It is priced. The price is access. Most people price themselves cheaply because they fear being alone, replaced, forgotten. That fear keeps them negotiating with disrespect. Negotiation implies equality. Disrespect already removed it. Once you stop negotiating and start adjusting access, the dynamic resolves itself. The resolution may not look like reconciliation. It may look like distance. It may look like disappearance. That is still resolution. Resolution does not mean harmony. It means finality. Finality is what ends patterns. There is a cold clarity that arrives when you accept this. You stop trying to fix people. You stop trying to be understood. You stop explaining what should already be obvious. You let behavior speak. Behavior always does. As this posture becomes consistent, something changes internally. Disrespect stops feeling personal. It starts feeling logistical, like a signal that access needs adjustment. No anger, no speeches, no emotional labor, just recalibration. People around you feel it, even if they cannot name it. They become more careful, not because you are intimidating, but because the cost of misalignment increased. Cost is what governs respect, not feelings, not tone, not words. And once access is reduced and not restored prematurely, the pattern does not return, because there is nothing left to push against. There is one mistake that quietly resurrects disrespect after it appears to be gone. One exception, one moment of softened access, one lapse in consistency, not because the other person forgot the boundary, but because they were watching to see if it was real. Disrespect does not return suddenly. It returns experimentally. People test conditions the way pressure tests weak points. A small reach, a familiar tone, an old pattern reintroduced casually, not openly, not aggressively, just enough to see if the environment has actually changed. This is why intensity never works. Intensity fades. Consistency restructures. If access is reduced only when emotions are high, the system learns that pressure eventually restores proximity. If distance appears only during conflict, conflict becomes a tool. The behavior that ends disrespect permanently is not dramatic withdrawal. It is boring withdrawal. No announcement, no emotional punctuation, no final speech. Just the same reduced access, again and again, regardless of mood or context. This is where most people fail. They treat withdrawal as a response instead of a condition. They pull back when hurt, then re-engage when calm. That oscillation teaches others exactly how long they have to wait. Waiting is easy. What is difficult is permanence. Permanent changes feel cruel because they do not accommodate explanation. They do not leave room for reconciliation without structural adjustment. They do not offer emotional relief. That discomfort is the cost of finality. Finality is rare because it requires accepting outcomes without control over interpretation. When you reduce access and do not explain, you surrender the narrative. Others will invent their own. They may label you cold, arrogant, unreasonable, changed. You let them. Narrative control is less important than behavioral control. This is another instinct that must be dismantled. The instinct to manage how you are perceived. That instinct keeps people tolerating disrespect long after it should have ended. They fear being seen as the villain more than they fear continued erosion. Disrespect feeds on that fear. When you stop managing perception, the exchange simplifies. Behavior either aligns with the new conditions or disappears. This is not punishment. Punishment keeps engagement alive. It demands attention. It creates cycles. Withdrawal ends cycles. In professional environments, this often looks subtle. Fewer meetings, slower replies, narrower scope of involvement, no confrontation, no complaints, just less access to your time and effort. People notice quickly. Those who relied on casual overreach feel destabilized. They probe. They ask questions disguised as concern. They attempt to reinsert themselves into the old dynamic. You do not explain. Explanation restores familiarity. Instead, the new pattern remains. In family systems, this is even more uncomfortable. Familiarity is deep. Roles are old. Disrespect is often disguised as honesty or tradition. Distance is framed as betrayal. That framing is designed to preserve access. You do not argue with it. You reduce exposure. You shorten interactions. You limit topics. You leave earlier. You visit less. The absence of drama is what makes this effective. Drama gives others something to push against. Quiet change forces adaptation. Some family members will adjust. Their behavior becomes cleaner. Respect emerges without discussion. Others will escalate emotionally. Guilt, accusation, and nostalgia are deployed to recover access. You let them exhaust themselves. You do not negotiate with guilt. Negotiation implies that access is still open to persuasion. This posture feels colder than anger. Anger at least communicates investment. Cold consistency communicates closure. In social environments, the same rule applies. Disrespect often hides behind humor, teasing that stretches too far, familiarity that turns invasive. If you address it verbally, it often escalates or becomes performative. If you adjust access instead, the behavior either corrects or the relationship dissolves. Both outcomes are acceptable. This is another uncomfortable truth. Not every relationship is meant to be preserved. Some only exist because tolerance has been mistaken for loyalty. When tolerance ends, the relationship reveals its actual structure. Machiavelli understood that alliances maintained through weakness collapse under pressure. Alliances maintained through mutual cost endure. When someone knows they can lose access, they behave differently. Not kinder, more precise. Precision is respect. The behavior that ends disrespect permanently also changes how you see people. You stop categorizing them as good or bad. You see them as responsive or unresponsive to structure. This removes emotional charge. Disrespect stops feeling personal. It becomes informational, a signal that access is mispriced. You adjust price. Price adjustment does not require emotion. It requires consistency. This is why calm explanations are counterproductive. Explanations imply that alignment is possible through understanding. Sometimes it is. In disrespect dynamics, understanding has already occurred. The behavior continued anyway. Understanding is not the issue. Cost is. When cost increases and remains increased, behavior aligns or exits. This is where detachment forms naturally. You are no longer emotionally invested in outcomes. You are invested in maintaining structure. Structure produces outcomes automatically. You do not need to watch closely. You do not need to monitor intent. You observe behavior and respond with access calibration. Over time, this becomes instinctive. You no longer feel the urge to correct tone. You no longer feel compelled to respond quickly. You no longer feel responsible for maintaining equilibrium. Equilibrium is no longer your job. This creates a subtle shift in presence. People feel it before they understand it. Interactions slow. Boundaries are assumed. Tests become rare, not because you demanded respect, because disrespect stopped being functional. Function governs behavior more reliably than emotion. The final stage of this shift is quiet. There is no sense of victory, no satisfaction, just absence. Absence of tension, absence of vigilance, absence of negotiation. Situations that once consumed energy no longer reach you. You are not above them. You are simply out of range. This is the point where reacting emotionally feels unnecessary, primitive, like responding to a stimulus that no longer applies. You do not suppress reaction. There is nothing to react to. Disrespect ends not because you finally stood your ground, but because there is no ground left to stand on. Access was removed, and once removed consistently, it does not need to be defended. It simply stays gone. What makes this behavior permanent is not that it forces others to change. It is that it removes the need for agreement. Agreement keeps dynamics alive. Disagreement keeps them alive too. Both require engagement. Withdrawal does not. When access changes without explanation, the other person is left alone with their interpretation. That isolation matters. People can argue with you. They cannot argue with absence. There is no surface to push against, no statement to dismantle, no position to negotiate. This is why disrespect often spikes briefly when access is reduced. The spike is not confidence. It is confusion. Confusion created by the loss of feedback. The system reaches for the last known lever. When it fails, behavior recalibrates or disengages. You do not need to witness that recalibration. This is another instinct that fades here. The instinct to watch for results, to see if the lesson landed, to confirm that the behavior worked. That instinct pulls you back into engagement. You let it go. Once access is reduced, your attention moves elsewhere, not as a tactic, but because there is nothing left to manage. The dynamic is no longer active. It is either adapting in the background or dissolving entirely. Both outcomes are acceptable because neither requires your participation. This is where the shift becomes irreversible. You are no longer responding to disrespect. You are responding to structure, and structure does not require emotion to maintain. Emotion is what kept the cycle alive. Without it, there is nothing to return to. The world does not reward explanations. It responds to structure. You change the structure, everything else followed. Nothing more needs to be done. What most people never see is how early disrespect is trained. Not consciously, not maliciously, but mechanically. Every time a boundary is softened, every time access is restored too easily, every time familiarity is rewarded after erosion, the system learns. It learns how little it costs to cross you. This is not about bad people. It is about learning. Humans learn through outcome, not intention. When behavior produces no meaningful loss, it is reinforced. When it produces loss, it adjusts. Disrespect is simply a behavior that has learned it is safe. Safe behaviors repeat. This is why initial tolerance matters more than later correction. Early moments set price. Once price is set, raising it becomes difficult. Not impossible, but costly. And most people avoid cost until erosion becomes unbearable. By then, the behavior is no longer testing. It is established. This is where many attempts fail. They try to renegotiate a contract that was already signed silently. They appeal to fairness, to history, to understanding. None of those change terms. Terms change only when access changes. Access is not just presence. It is responsiveness, availability, emotional labor, predictability. When all of those remain intact, the relationship has not changed, no matter what was said. Words are surface signals. Structure is what trains behavior. This is why authority collapses quietly, long before it collapses visibly. The moment access becomes unconditional, authority is gone. What remains is habit. Habit is difficult to reverse with speech. Machiavelli understood that authority is not defended through force alone, but through controlled availability. Princes who were too accessible lost reverence. Those who were distant but consistent maintained it. Distance here does not mean absence. It means scarcity. Scarcity forces valuation. Valuation forces care. Care ends disrespect. This is why the behavior works across contexts. In work environments, those who are always available are the first to be overextended. Their time is treated casually. Their boundaries are assumed flexible, not because they lack skill, but because their access is cheap. When access tightens without explanation, behavior adjusts. Deadlines are respected. Tone improves. Requests become cleaner, not because of confrontation, because the cost structure changed. In social dynamics, the same pattern applies. Overfamiliarity erodes respect faster than conflict. When people feel entitled to you, they feel entitled to test you. Entitlement ends when entitlement stops paying off. That is why this behavior feels cold. It does not offer reassurance. It does not maintain comfort. It does not explain itself. Comfort is what allows entitlement to survive. When comfort is removed, behavior recalibrates. This does not mean becoming rigid or hostile. It means becoming selective without announcement. Selectivity signals value more clearly than assertion ever could. Most people announce selectivity. They declare boundaries. They postures. That invites challenge. Quiet selectivity cannot be challenged. There is nothing to argue with. You simply are less reachable, less responsive, less accommodating, and you don't justify it. Justification invites negotiation. Negotiation implies flexibility. Flexibility is what created the problem. This is also why one exception revives disrespect instantly. One moment of restored access tells the system that persistence works, that conditions are temporary, that erosion is survivable. People do not need many confirmations. One is enough. Consistency is what ends the cycle. Consistency feels harsh because it removes emotional relief. There is no moment of resolution, no conversation that clears the air, just a new normal. Humans adapt to normal faster than they adapt to arguments. Once the new normal stabilizes, the behavior stops, or the person removes themselves. Both outcomes are clean. This is where detachment appears naturally, not forced, not practiced. It emerges because fewer things reach you. You are no longer managing other people's behavior emotionally. You are managing access structurally. Structural management requires less energy. Energy returns to you. You stop monitoring tone. You stop anticipating reactions. You stop bracing for disrespect because it no longer has a place to land. What once felt personal now feels procedural. That is the final shift. Not empowerment, not confidence, just clarity. You see disrespect early now, not because you are sharper, but because you are less invested in preserving access at all costs. You no longer wait for proof. You respond to pattern. Pattern recognition replaces emotional tolerance. This is colder than anger. Anger still cares. Pattern recognition does not. You do not hate. You do not resent. You adjust. Adjustment ends cycles permanently. There is no need to announce anything at the end. No statement, no boundary speech, no final message. The absence of access is the message. And once that absence is consistent, it does not need reinforcement. It simply remains. Disrespect ends not because people suddenly value you more, but because they can no longer reach you the same way. Reach is power. You change the reach. Everything else followed. Nothing else is required.